So we are now joined by Rhys Llywelyn, who is our HCC Market Development Manager, and also Sophie Colquhoun. Sophie grew up on a small holding in West Wales, and her parents ran a small smoked salmon business. So she has been invested in the food industry from a young age. She's an experienced leader in food marketing and category strategy. And she spent 20 years working in the food industry, training with Mars as a category controller at Ginsters and a group marketing director for Tulip Foods. She works with Brookdale Consulting to deliver current insight programs for Welsh Government, food and drink, and currently runs her own business, Category Insight. She passionately believes that insight gives us the heart of what the consumer wants, and that's the insight that she's bringing us today in relation to our wonderful Welsh brands. So I'm hoping this works. Sophie, can you hear me? And I'm handing over to you.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can. The floor is yours, Sophie.
That's great, thank you. Noswaith Dar, everybody. Really good evening. I'm really delighted to be here tonight, sharing some great insight from HCC and actually the Welsh Government Food and Drink Insight Programme. I'm going to talk about the value of Welsh lamb, shopper's perspective, and I'm going to talk about three things really. Firstly, what shoppers like about lamb, and also what lamb shoppers need help with. And I think your butcher in the audience has already mentioned some of that tonight, so that's great. I'm going to talk about Welshness and its relevance to lamb. Seems obvious, but I've got some shopper stuff on that. And I'm going to talk about shoppers' views on Welsh lamb versus other countries of origin of lamb. And I'm going to finish with a few key takeaways, I suppose, if you either supply or retail lamb. So let's start with shoppers' views about lamb and lamb loyalists, or people who buy lamb regularly. What they really talk about is they love the eat. They love that it's tender and it's tasty. They talk about it being comforting and nostalgic, bring back to my childhood, my mum, my nan. They also say it's a bit of an expensive meat. It's for special occasions probably. It's for their family Sunday roast or that special meal for two in the week. It's not light, it's a rich meat. It's densely flavoured, slightly fatty. For enthusiasts, that's part of the pleasure. That's part of the enjoyment. It's like bed pork. It's naughty but nice. And for regular lamb shoppers, it's regarded as fairly flexible and versatile, and is really useful for both many cuts with many types of dishes. But they also say that when they get to the shops, they see some lack of inspiration or choice at the fixture. Often it's hidden and not many clues of how to actually use lamb. But what about the shoppers who understand lamb but only use it occasionally? And there are a few things that might put them off. They talk about it being tricky to cook and serve. Lamb can be difficult to get right. They say, I love lamb, but it feels a struggle. Lamb needs attention. And the confidence is low. I'm always worried it won't go right. Lamb just feels more complicated, tricky. I'm a bit frightened of it. But when they go out, they really choose lamb. They love eating lamb when they go out, and they rely on other people's skills and techniques to get it right. And it's really like someone else is taking the risk so they can make sure they can get it right. And then they do say lamb can be expensive. You know, if you're feeding a large family, it can be significantly more than, say, chicken. But we know that lamb can go a long way, and we actually need probably less lamb than you would with other proteins, and maybe some shoppers don't know that. And they also talk about there's a lack of inspiration in store, just like the regular shoppers. They say sometimes there's a limited choice or a limited range and not many ideas or options. So I suppose the stakes are high, so it's got to be good for these shoppers. They need to get it right. So making lamb less risky for shoppers is probably the biggest route to growth. And this year with HCC, we did a big piece of work where we looked at where that risk could be taken away. And one of the things we talked about was a meal for two, because you know, if you're buying lamb just for a meal for two, the cost is less and you can get it right just for two people. And one of the things about that meal for two evening occasion, if you like, only 6% of those meat evening occasions are made with lamb. That means 94% are made with other proteins. So for us, if we can get into that occasion and grow that occasion for lamb, then that could really drive sales. And that's one of the things that HCC have thought about in their advertising this year. I'm going to share a little bit more about that later on. The other thing about risk is taking away risk. And one of the things you can do about that is around brands. Brands that shoppers know and trust will deliver for them time and time again. They're much more likely to try and then try again. So I want to sort of move on and talk about Welshness and what that means for shoppers. And then what about Welshness in lamb? And what do shoppers say about Welsh lamb specifically? So I want to start with English shoppers and Welshness. For English shoppers, natural and freshness is at the heart of what Welshness is about. They talk about sheep, green hills, small farms, rural farmers not built up. They talk about beaches, mountains, windy roads, villages and small towns. They talk about wet rain, lots of rain. That's why it's so green. And the #1 association for English shoppers about Wales is lamb. And they talk about human scale, smaller family farms, crafts, artisanal, not mega commercial operations. And they talk about Wales being both physically and emotionally close for English consumers. Certainly the southeast is much closer to Wales than it is to, say, Scotland. And certainly the borders are much closer, Welsh borders are much closer to Wales than, say, Scotland. And they also talk about holiday happiness. In 2019, we had 8.4 million visitors to Wales. I suspect this year was many more, having been on beaches this summer. And when you ask those visitors whether they feel partly Welsh, a quarter of them say that they do. They've either been brought up in Wales, like I was, or they have Welsh siblings, or siblings living in Wales, or parents are Welsh, or grandparents are Welsh. That's a quarter of the people living in England who are visitors are feeling partly Welsh. So when you ask them about what Welsh meat means to shoppers, and you ask them what does it mean for you, they listed a whole raft of stuff. And for about half of shoppers, it means outdoor grass-fed, better quality, better tasting, fresher, natural, better welfare, and sustainable. And then if you think about Welsh lamb, and you ask groups of shoppers and get them to talk about Welsh lamb, firstly they say, you know, lamb is Wales' #1 most positive association, is the closest thing to Wales. They talk about uncompromised natural meat. It feels more pure. They say things like a natural environment links to natural meat. They talk about animal welfare, a good life in their natural habitat, more free range, out in the wild, not penned in. And they talk about traditional methods, rural farming communities, and they're really happy to support that. And they say it's been traditional in Wales for generations. It's known for its lamb. And they talk about environmentally sensitive. And this all leads to really English shoppers thinking that Welsh lamb is better tasting. And then you ask them to talk about British lamb. And when they talk about Britain per se, they talk about smaller fields, towns and cities. And they say stuff like more built up in postage stamp fields next to a main road. I drive around the M25 most days and the sheep are there right next to the motorway and you think, much less positive imagery. They're not just thinking hills or wet rain, lots of rain, that's why it's so green, but more motorways and small fields. And then you take it a step further and you talk about New Zealand lamb, and then they talk about the really obvious stuff that we'd expect, like ship round the world, cannot be fresh. How old is it? And as well as freshness, I think there's something around sustainability that is yet to come out really here. As you probably know, the BBC One show did a massive poll during COP26 where they asked consumers what one behaviour change would they do because of climate change, and they gave them a raft of options given by experts. The #1 was actually to eat less meat, but the #2 was to buy locally and in season. So if you're a New Zealand meat, then sustainability will become more of an issue. But alongside freshness and sustainability, shoppers also say stuff like it's more mass produced, it's industrialized, it feels less premium and cheaper. Doesn't mean there isn't a role for New Zealand meat at different times of the year, but there are a lot of things that shoppers don't like about it so much versus British and Welsh. So when you compare Welsh to British to New Zealand, then actually Welsh lamb is seen really differently by shoppers. They talk about Welsh being hills, mountains, natural, fresh, better tasting. British being more built up, near roads, just a little bit less positive. And from a New Zealand point of view, they talk about it being imported from the other side of the world, less fresh, less sustainable, less premium. And that all leads to actually shoppers thinking that Wales is are the experts in lamb. We're less likely to get it wrong. We're more trusted and more unlikely to go wrong. Much less risky to use Welsh lamb, a trusted brand in lamb with real emotional values. So that's what shoppers say in groups. But what about when you ask hundreds of shoppers, or in fact 900 English shoppers? We wanted to understand what order do people think about when they buy things in supermarkets? What's the things that are most important to them and in what order? So we asked them, what do you look for when you're buying lamb? And the order is first, price and taste, number one, two, but price and taste. And nearly, by the way, in almost every category you ask that, nearly always they talk about price and taste. And then they say animal welfare, then they say local farmers, then they say leanness, then they say country of origin, etc. And I know what you're thinking, sort of country of origin is 6 on the list, so therefore it doesn't really matter which country it comes from. But actually we know that lamb brands stand for so much more than just the country of origin. The country itself brings a whole load of other values to it. So if you ask English shoppers some really interesting questions around taste and animal welfare, which are number 2 and number 3 on the list, you ask them, where is the most natural place to rear lamb? Most say Wales. Where do lambs have the happiest life? Most say Wales. Which lamb tastes better? Most say Wales. And I suppose then if you're thinking about your decision process in store and the way shoppers choose, then no wonder when you ask them what is their favourite to eat, Welsh lamb, they say Welsh lamb is versus British. And then they say, if it's labelled as Welsh in store, are you more likely to buy lamb? And 31% say yes, and that's a net positive score. So you've taken away the negatives. And by the way, the middle bit was mainly ambivalent. So for 31% of shoppers, it's saying, yes, it really does encourage me to buy more lamb. And that's 4.5 million households, which is a really large number. And then you ask them, how should a shop sell lamb? Should you just sell it as British? Should you sell Welsh, or should you sell both? And actually in England, 8 out of 10 shoppers say, actually you should sell both British and Welsh, roughly equally split. And finally, if you ask English shoppers how Welsh lamb should be sold, should you sell it as British or should you sell it as Welsh? 7 out of 10 say Welsh. So I've talked a lot about what English shoppers want and English shoppers' views about lamb and different countries of origin. But I suppose, what about Wales? And unsurprisingly, when you talk to Welsh lamb shoppers, then the passion for Welsh is even stronger. About 4 years ago, Welsh Government Insight Programme, we started a piece of work which we've called the Value of Welshness. And we literally did this across a number of categories, one of them being cheese. And we literally showed this photograph. And it said, would you prefer to buy it said, which one would you choose to buy? Whether the British one, the Welsh one, the no country of origin one, and none. And we asked that across all categories, and you look at the lamb number, 86% of Welsh shoppers said, I would prefer to buy the Welsh product. I'm not surprised it was a massive majority. What I was just surprised was how strong that was, 86%. So the desire for Welsh lamb in Wales is really significant. So what does all this mean? So HCC have been using and sharing this insight from this research this year, and there have been 2 really big changes, I think, this year in lamb. One, from an HCC perspective, there has been more of a focus on easy meals for 2, trying to get to those low-risk occasions. So, for example, here we've got a beautiful Welsh lamb steak, low risk, beautiful Welsh lamb, great entry point for lamb for that meal for 2 occasion. And they advertised it on social media near where Welsh lamb was being stocked in the stores. And the second thing that happened this year was M&S launched Welsh lamb in season across the whole summer. And the result of that is 2 things. One, firstly, lamb is up 13% over the summer since 2019 this year. I haven't used 2020 figures because, of course, we had lockdown. So everything in retail got shifted by lockdown last year in 2020. But lamb grew faster than any other species over the summer this summer. And the second thing is M&S launched a whole new look lamb offer featuring Welsh lamb throughout the summer. And M&S sales grew at twice the pace of any other retailer this year versus last year at 36%, and actually versus 2019 at plus 58%, so significant growth. So their execution and how they changed the range and what they delivered in store alongside the Welsh Lamb credentials and HCC campaign for lamb has really shown massive growth. And the last thing I'd really like to finish doing is, I suppose, three takeaways. One, if we can make lamb less risky for those potential shoppers and promote easy to use meals for two with fail-safe cuts that are not expensive for the comparative meal, that's a really good thing to do. The second thing is, we are seen, or Wales are seen as the experts in lamb because, you know, shoppers believe it's better tasting, better animal welfare, and that it can add value to the category and the retailers that sell Welsh lamb. And finally, if we have Welsh lamb, let's sell it as Welsh and offer both Welsh and British lamb in stores, because really executed well, like M&S have shown this summer, it can really drive sales. Diolch yn fawr, thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much, Sophie. That was an absolutely fantastic presentation and insight. And we've talked a lot tonight about a positive story around Welsh lamb, and it's great to see it resonating with consumers. Now, we've only got Sophie and Rhys, who I've mentioned is our market development manager, until 6:30. Technology is not going to be kind to us, so I want to dive straight into some questions. Fascinating insight. So if there is a question from the floor, please can I ask you to raise your hand? I think you've stunned some people into silence. I can see there are some coming in online and through the chat. Sophie, can I ask, can Welsh meat influence the consumer who is concerned about climate change?
Well, I think shoppers believe that, well, we are environmentally more sustainable. But I don't know what the research says, and I know that Rhys is looking into some of that at the moment, or HCC are looking into that at the moment. So I think there could be a story, but I don't know the numbers or the facts behind that.
Okay, thank you. And another question, and this probably comes to both of you, but Rhys, I'll come to you first. Are our brands strong enough to compete with increased exports from around the world? So Rhys, if I come to you first, and Sophie, can I have your insight as well, please?
But yeah, I think it clearly demonstrates from the insight that Sophie shared with us that our brands are strong enough. You know, we've got that brand recognition. We've been working for a number of years to establish Welsh Lamb as a brand, as a premium brand, and it clearly demonstrates that perception is there with the English shopper, with the UK shoppers. So I would say most definitely yes. We've achieved what we set out to do with the brand, and we've got that right across the board.
Thank you, Rhys. And Sophie, can I ask the same question of you, please?
Yeah, I think this is quite interesting. So, you know, sustainability obviously is what everybody's talking about at the moment. And there's one thing that has really resonated, which was that #2 fact in the BBC poll, which is about buying local and buying in season. And if there's anything that Welsh Lamb can do, it's absolutely, you know, is bang on for that. And certainly within Britain, that is a massive plus for the future, and potentially even Europe as well, versus say New Zealand or Australia, for instance.
Yeah. Traditionally, and it was right at the top of your chart, Sophie, that the biggest influencing factor on buying lamb is price, and you also talked about making buying less risky. What do you think will move price further down that matrix and rise value and sustainability nearer to the top? What do you think the driving factors will be in consumers changing their habits?
So I think when you ask consumers what they always say price, but when they get to the fixture, you know, and if you look at any meat fixture and you take, say, any retailer, they normally have what they call a good, better, best strategy. So breast would be like finest and mid-tier, and then value and piece. But people have a set of boundaries. So what they then build in is a load of emotional stuff that goes with that, whether that is all the stuff that I've been talking about, So anything that adds to that helps them, more people stay in that sort of, in the segment that they want to buy in. Some people are forced to buy just on price, but other people trade up for loads of different reasons. And that segment can get bigger if there are more reasons. I don't know if that's a straight answer, but I think that helps.
I think it's an honest one, and that's all we ask of you. Can I ask if there are any questions from the floor? Wyn, can I come to you, please?
My question is to Rhys, and you did mention brand there, and I think it's very important. The brand of Welsh Lamb is very important moving forward. But how do we evolve this? How do we move this brand forward, Rhys, into the new age with the challenges that we're facing, you know, from the environment, from being carbon neutral? So how do we evolve? Because we're seeing Origin Green doing some work. We're seeing New Zealand Lamb doing some work. So how do we keep this brand right to the peak where it should be?
And you should say, Wyn, that you've seen HCC doing the Welsh way as well. So, you know, that forms the foundation really for any work that we do. You know, we've done a lot of research into identifying, you know, how sustainable, what the carbon footprint of Welsh Lamb is. And it's about communicating that message. You know, I think we've got to be careful. You know, at the end of the day, we promote the brand, and it's the underlying brand values of what you're talking about, and it's about how we communicate those almost subliminally to the consumer, and you know, that is about the use of imagery, about the use of the kinds of wording and messaging we use in our communications, because you know, at the end of the day, I don't think that the consumer at the fixture is going to be actually interested in knowing what the carbon footprint is. That message will have been instilled further back. You know, it's a message that we've got to get right much earlier in that purchasing decision. And I think, you know, we've done a lot of work in this area already. We've been doing a lot of work in changes in consumer perception throughout lockdown, because it's definitely accelerated a lot of different changes. And this is one of them. You know, it's getting that message right, and presenting Welsh Lamb as the sustainable choice to consumers in Wales, in England, and also across the EU.
Thank you, Rhys. I know we're very close to time, but I wanted to just ask you directly back, how receptive are you finding supermarkets to the messaging coming in about Welsh Lamb? And we've probably only got about a minute to answer that question. So short and swift, but just to summarise on a really positive note.
Okay, shall I go first? So you know, we know that the retailers are keen to paint a sustainable image, and we can help them do that. And this is the message that we've been taking to them over the last year or so, and even longer than that, to be honest, is that we can help them present themselves as a sustainable, green, alternative retailer, and our products are one of the building blocks that they need to make sure that they can offer to offer that to the consumer.
Thank you, Rhys. Do you have anything you'd like to add, Sophie, before I know our screens are going to cut out? But thank you both for your time in advance.
No, I mean, the only thing I would say is, you know, some of the work this year, the launch in M&S has made a significant difference, and it shows that with not just the brand, but all the things that go with it, executed well, promotions and everything else, then you can drive sales, and that is exactly what most retailers are after.
Yeah, thank you both so sincerely. I know there are questions around the floor, and I am going to apologise because I know we're very short on time, and I've been warned that I'm not allowed to allow this session to go over. So if there are questions around the floor that you haven't had a chance to ask, pop them on your question sheets and we will answer them via email. Can I thank both Rhys and Sophie sincerely for a fabulous session. I've thoroughly enjoyed the insight. It's great to know that our positive story is resonating with consumers, and it makes me feel incredibly optimistic about the opportunities we have for our Welsh Lamb brands, both at home domestically and in the export markets that we are already targeting and those that we can in the future. So Rhys, Sophie, thank you both very, very much for your time.